Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of the Planning Pulse with me, Stacey Robbins, and today I'm joined by my colleague Sarah Buckingham.
Hello.
So Sarah, do you want to very quickly just introduce yourself to the listeners, because some people will know you and they would have had you as their case officer on their applications and other agents as well, that is, but some people may not know you, so do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Hi, I'm Sarah Buckingham. I work at Wealdon District Planning in the DM department.
You can't remember what team you're in.
I know. I'm on the spot here. In the South team. I used to work in the North, but now I work in the South. I'm all over the district. So I might have been your planning officer. I might be your colleague. I might be your neighbour. You don't know.
Excellent. All right. Okay. Thank you. And just by way of introduction, listeners may be tuning in wanting to hear about the Supreme Court case in Finch, because Sam and I had begun to talk about that last time, but we ran out of time. Actually, today we're not going to talk about that because something else has happened more recently in the form of a new NPPF, new National Planning Policy Framework, which was released by a new government on a couple of days ago, July the 30th. And we're going to talk about that, but we're not going to talk about the main headline changes, which are kind of everywhere and they're in the press. We're going to talk about some of the things that maybe people will have missed, and we'll come on to that in a second. But before we go any further, and Sarah and I have debated whether we say something about this, and it feels only right and fitting that we do say something, and it's just mentioned very briefly, if we can get through it. Our very dear and lovely colleague Graham Keane, who some listeners and certainly those that watch the planning committees and are very close to our work will probably know, but our lovely colleague Graham very sadly and suddenly passed last week, very unexpectedly, was not unwell, and it feels only right to just mark this episode of the podcast with a comment about Graham, who was an absolute superstar. Graham was our countryside rights of way and coastal engineer, and also commented on planning applications from a drainage point of view. He'd worked at Wealdon for 38 years and was on the cusp of retirement. Absolute superstar. I genuinely think if you cut Graham in half, it would say on one half Wealdon District Council and on the other half public servant. And we take our hats off to Graham, who was a very special person and leaves a very big hole in the workforce here at Wealdon. So we just wanted to make a very short comment about Graham. If you're up there, if there isn't up there, then thanks very much, Graham. Our thoughts are very much with him and his family. All right, moving on, and if we can make a start with what we were going to talk about, let's just quickly introduce it. So as I say, Sarah, we're going to talk about the NPPF, aren't we? Get yourself some tissue. So as I said at the beginning, government is out to consultation on the NPPF, and those changes to the NPPF are variously discussed and they're out there in the media, and you can find it, listeners. They do cover the things that were long trailed, updating the presumption in favour of development, strengthening obligations on cross-boundary working between neighbouring authorities, changes to housing need, which was a really important one and one which was in the press a lot, matters around green belt and the so-called grey belt, which we don't have in Wealdon, but that will be topical elsewhere. And there are loads of other stuff around infrastructure changes and the principle of brownfield development. Now we can put links below in the bio to where you can view that consultation document and where to go if you want to comment on those changes. But what we thought we would do in this episode of The Pulse is to discuss what we think are important proposals that some people may well have missed amongst the main headlines. And as some of these are likely to land with a bit of a thump locally, I think thump locally, assuming they are enacted in the NPPF, then we thought we'd draw your attention to them. So here's our take on what we're calling these other key changes that you may have missed. Now remember, you all have until the 24th of September to comment on these. So Sarah, do you want to introduce the main headlines?
Yes, I do. But I will just touch on that point. 24th of September at 11:45 p.m. Not midnight. You don't have all night. You've got to get in by 11:45.
Oh, that's a good point, actually.
Yes, I saw that. Maybe to avoid a breakdown of systems.
Yeah,
Who knows?
absolutely.
All right, thank you, Stacey. We're going to run through the following items. Changes to the planning application fees, and then cost recovery for the local authorities related to National Significant Infrastructure Projects, NSIPs.
NSIPs, yeah.
Building infrastructure to grow the economy. strengthening Section 106 agreements, known as legal agreements,
Yeah.
changes to the local plan intervention criteria, change to the local plan examination process, and rowing back on beauty, the impacts for design.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you. So let's just get into it then. Why don't you kick off with the first topic, which is some stuff around planning fees, which is going to hit people in the pocket, potentially. And then the stuff around we're going to call them MSIP. We'll call them MSIPs for the rest of the pulse, but it's the nationally significant infrastructure projects.
Yes, so changes to planning application fees and cost recovery for local authorities related to NSIPs. The government is consulting on changes to planning fees again.
Yeah.
This builds on the changes from planning fees introduced by the previous government in December 2023, so not very long ago.
Yeah.
The headlines include, and this one is the one, planning proposed fee increases for householder planning applications. Currently, £258, set to go up to £528 to meet cost recovery levels.
That's a lot. It's a lot, isn't it?
That's a lot. That's more than 100. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
That's not insignificant. Second, seeking views on whether a smaller increase to householder fee, maybe 50% increase, would be more appropriate. So a little bit less. Seeking views on increasing fees for application types such as prior approvals and Section 73 applications.
Yeah.
Introducing fees for applications with no fees at the moment, such as demolition consent in a conservation area, listing building consent, TPO applications.
Yeah. That last one's interesting, isn't it? We were chatting about it earlier before recording this, because it does cover a range of application types where at the moment there is no charge, and some of that, for example, in the case of listed building applications, if you live in a designated heritage asset, then it's been a long-held concession by successive governments that as having to make applications for alterations and there'd be no fee. But as we were chatting, there are resource implications for that, not just at Wealdon but in other councils, where you have to employ experts in order to process and advise on those applications, and that's expensive, and yet there's no fee for the application submission. So interesting, can understand why the government has done it.
No cost recovery at the moment, but perhaps
exactly
there could be some.
Yeah, I mean, you can see people commenting about that. People are bound to have something to say about that. So yeah, watch that one with interest.
Yep, it's clear from the consultation that the new government does not consider that the fee increase introduced in December 2023 went far enough.
Yeah.
And that the funding shortfalls still experienced by many local planning authorities, LPAs, needs addressing. The proposed fee increase for householder applications to £528 is a large increase, and that will surprise many. The justification given is that it would allow struggling local authorities to reach cost recovery levels for householder applications. Whilst the industry response was mostly positive in December 2023 to the fee increases, it remains to be seen whether the reaction will be so positive when looking to the future. The consultation is also seeking views on two models for setting fees locally. The first model is full localization. So this is where there are no fees set nationally. All LPAs would have to set their own planning fees within existing fee categories and exemptions set by the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
This would allow local planning authorities to set their own fee levels up to cost recovery levels.
Yeah.
Perhaps they're different across authorities.
Yeah.
The second model is local variation from a default national fee. So local variation would maintain the nationally set default fee, but give LPAs the option to vary the fees within prescribed limits, where they consider the national fee set does not meet their actual costs.
Yeah.
So in most cases, this would go up. Perhaps it could go down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who knows? Yep. This would allow authorities who wish to set their own fees within the existing fee categories and exemptions set by the Secretary of State the discretion to do so.
Yeah.
This could be for all fees or just select fee categories if the LPA wish to be selective on which fees they set locally. Localization of planning fees would require primary legislation to establish enabling powers through the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. Finally, cost recovery for local authorities related to NSIPs.
NSIPs, yeah.
Yep. The consultation is also seeking views on whether to make the provision to allow upper and lower tier or unitary local authorities to recover costs for relevant services provided in relation to applications. The proposed applications for development consent under the Planning Act 2008. Yeah. Using the power at Section 54A.
Yeah. And that, I mean, just quick cut into the point, we don't get that many although we enter into discussions with lots of different developers, and they deliberately will make applications just below or up to the NSIP threshold. Primarily that is in relation to commercial solar farms, so set at 50 megawatts, so they'll come in at 49.5 megawatts because they don't want to go over that threshold because it's a bit more hassle and there isn't a local decision. So we'll see, because there is actually elsewhere in the consultation, and we'll come on to it in a second, changes to those thresholds. So that's why I think government is also consulting on the potential fee recovery for the local level, because you'll get more, or potentially more, of those NSIPs at the local level. Alright, so the next bit I was going to chat about, so thank you for that, Sarah. And it's just some stuff around building infrastructure to grow the economy. And grow is a sort of major figure, or major word rather, that figured a significant amount in the now government manifesto in relation to what they could do to the country in terms of growing our way out of problems, we'll say problems, and has made it clear that planning is going to be at the centre of that agenda for economic growth. And all the consultation that reflects that planning is critical to that role in facilitating economic growth. And as I said, changes to the NSIP regime are being proposed in relation to the ability to push certain types of commercial developments and sectors, all under the umbrella of building a modern economy. So the types of development included in the consultation are laboratories, gigafactories, digital infrastructure, and freight and logistics. Now maybe we won't get gigafactories or data centres or anything like that, but you can see a situation where freight and logistics applications or laboratories are the subject of Wildern specific applications in a rural area. But clearly these changes seek to make it easier to build these types of facilities in order to create an expectation that suitable sites for the modern economy uses are identified in local plans, although maybe they might come through via the DM process, just via applications. Who knows? But clearly the changes aim to give a more explicit recognition of the need to support for proposals for new or upgraded facilities and infrastructure. It also includes power connections to the network grid, so definitely look out for that and comment on that. That is something that comes up a lot, isn't it? That whilst might permit development, that power connections are poor or unstable and unreliable, so definitely you can see any proposals to expand those and develop those as being supported in a rural area. Do we need to talk about digital infrastructure? I don't think so. Let's skip on to the next bit, because I can see this bit being of interest to parish and town councils and local residents, and it's the stuff around Section 106, but it's also the stuff that's not said and is implied, and the stuff that talks about previous comments in the public domain. But Sarah, I know you were going to talk about this bit, so yeah, Section 106.
Yes, we're talking about strengthening Section 106. So Section 106 agreements feature a limited amount in the consultation, where they were mentioned that they were almost exclusively in the context of the golden rules to guide development in the Greenbelt. Yeah. However, the House of Commons sessions in which the NPPF consultation was launched saw numerous references to the role of Section 106. Responding to a question about local Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, said, and I quote, "People often reject housing proposals because they do not see infrastructure. Yeah. That is why we have the golden rules. Why I have asked the departments to look at what we can do to ensure that infrastructure is there, and why we will support strengthening of Section 106 to ensure that developers do not try to squeeze out of what they have promised as part of development." So this could be schools, hospitals, all the important things that we all feel that we need. Rayner also said the government will, quote, "consult on how to stop developers who have paid over the odds for land, using that as an excuse for negotiating down their Section 106 contributions."
So there's a bit more to this, isn't there? There's some stuff that we think that Angela Rayner is hinting at, and stuff that's gone before, but I know you know about this, Sarah, so do you want to walk us through it?
Yeah, so back in October 2023, the Labour Party committed to upskilling local authorities on Section 106 negotiations through an expert Central Take-Back Control Unit 2. As well as this, they pledged to increase transparency around the viability process for the development of new affordable and social housing by creating guidance on viability levels across different parts of the country, and a model assessment form that developers and councils can use when evaluating this.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. So
your note on 2 is because we're going to include links, but we'll come to that in a second.
It appears from Angela Rayner's comments in the Commons that this is a commitment that the Secretary of State plans to uphold.
Yeah.
It could be, excuse me, it could also signal the government's commitment to the Section 106 developer contribution model, at least in the short term.
Yeah.
It's anticipated that the measure to strengthen Section 106 will come forward in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill.
So it's interesting, I think, because as you said, we often hear about this. We often get people concerned that there are promises within a planning application. Developer says that they'll do X, Y, and Z, or they'll pay for something else. And then later down the line, when people perhaps aren't looking as closely in terms of the period when they are commenting on the application, something changes. There's a viability case that's presented, or there's an argument presented that they can't afford a certain component. And I think all of this is indicative of giving us, the local authority level, greater powers to scrutinise and test and challenge that, which I think, and I'm sure listeners will agree, can only be a good thing, unless you're a developer, that is. But anyway, moving on rapidly. So the next topics relate to local plan matters, and maybe we'll kind of canter through this quite quickly because Nicola and team may wish to do a separate pulse around these matters. But in essence, the NPPF proposes changes to the local plan intervention criteria. So this is in chapter 10 of the consultation, and it's asking views on whether to remove or amend the criteria set out in the 2017 Housing White Paper, which is when the Secretary of State would set out when they would basically intervene in lack of action or the time taken for a local authority to produce their local development plan. And the consultation is seeking views on removing the policy criteria or amending the policy criteria. The one that's of interest, I think, is the amendment one, because it's proposing that decisions on the intervention would have regard to three things. Those are local development needs, sub-regional, regional and national development needs, or the actual plan progress. And the suggestion is that these tests would sit alongside other material considerations which Secretary of State could have regard to, and the weight to be applied to those in accordance with planning judgment. There's some other stuff around changes to the local plan examination process. That's Regulation 19, when you actually submit your plan for independent examination, which we are still hoping to do here at Wealden following the recent closure of the Regulation 18 plan, but more on that under a different pulse. But this is where the independent inspector would sit and scrutinise unmet and unresolved objections and then changes that the relevant local authority are proposing around the development plan. And essentially what this NPPF, with the consultation, what this part of the consultation on the NPPF is talking about is making it easier for the Secretary of State to intervene at that stage. So we'll see around that. There are some links which we're going to include in the bio below, which talks to an analysis of previous Secretary of States. There was a letter in 2015 from the then Secretary of State, Greg Clark, but that contrasts quite sharply with a recent letter to PINS from the Secretary of State, Matthew Pennycock, in relation to the extent of pragmatism that is referenced by government. Essentially it's being limited, we think, but have a look at those. We'll include links, as I say, below. And indeed links to the letters that you mentioned a moment ago, Sarah, in relation to other matters. So, we're nearly getting there, aren't we, to the end, that is. You were going to talk about changes to beauty, or making changes to beauty, and sort of impacts around design, because it does seem to be rowing back on what was introduced in December 23. Over to you.
21.
21, sorry.
Yes. Well, about beauty. What is beauty? Beauty is in the eye of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. No. Right, so since its introduction in 2021, the NPPF, in the 2021 NPPF, the industry has been struggling to apply a concept so nebulous and ambiguous as beauty to the acceptability of development proposals in the planning system. The changes to the NPPF that are set out for consultation seek out to rewind this with a more easily defined and analysed attribution of well-designed. So we're trading beauty for well-designed, a high bar for the design quality of new buildings and places that are now that are to be delivered and retained. But reversion to the use of the term well-designed can be interpreted with greater objectivity. in the context of the National Design Guide and gives greater clarity to those designing and delivering development. It also reflects the fact that there is more to high quality design than subjective aesthetic considerations. The section on effective use of land provides explicit confirmation that development on brownfield land should be regarded as acceptable in principle for homes. This is for homes and other identified needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last one was about mansards, wasn't it? Which was all a bit weird, really, but it is talking about removing them, isn't it?
Yeah, the removal of the very specific and somewhat curious guidance on the acceptability of mansard roofs is also proposed in favour of more general guidance on acceptability of the roof level extensions, including mansards.
I don't think there was much of a place for mansards in Wealdon. I think it was more kind of urban centres, London, kind of metropolitan areas where you can add more and more stories. And weirdly, this sort of reference to mansards in the December version of the 2023 version of the NPPF did draw a lot of ridicule, humour. People poke fun at it, really. But there you go. It seems like it's going to be wound back. And that's it, I think. There we go. Thank you, Sarah. That's our canter through what we were calling other key changes that could very well prove to be important. Will they make it to the final version of the NPPF? I don't know. But we hope you found that this is helpful and guides you through what you might want to say to the NPPF changes. As we say, consultation is currently open. We'll include links below to that consultation location online. In the fullness of time, you'll see the Wealdon response to the NPPF. We're currently drafting that, and if you are listening to this and are a Wealdon member, then you'll see circulated before that more of a detailed breakdown by myself and Nicola, which we're currently working on. Hope to get that out to you shortly, so that will help you to talk to residents and parishioners and parish and town councils about the changes with a Wealdon kind of skin around it. I think that's it. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon.
Well, thank you for having me on.
And we'll see you next time on an episode of The Pulse, when we'll pick up some of the topics that we had trailed. We know we're going to talk to you about Finch. We know we're going to talk to you about biodiversity net gain, and I'm sure there'll be some other topics that we can also go through. Thanks very much. See you again soon. Bye.